Yeah, welcome to Santa Monica, Karma Thegsum, Chöling in our weekly Zoom. And we usually 3 nights a month, we have lamas lead our Dharma group. And then 1 night a month, we're doing Chenrezig practice. And we've been meeting every week for over 15 years. And you're welcome to join and be a member or support us in some way through donations. And I think you're all getting our emails. You can also make donations to Lama Adam tonight as well. And so Lama Adam, I will just read something briefly from Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, and then you're welcome to kick us off.
That's good.
Let us begin our participation in these teachings in the spirit of the bodhicitta, consisting in developing the commitment to enlightenment, generating the firm resolve to accomplish that most precious of all goals, complete and perfect Buddhahood for the sake of sentient beings who are countless in number as space is limitless in extent. In order to be able to do this, one must exert oneself in listening to, reflecting over, and meditating on the genuine teachings. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. So let's begin with the part where I figure out if I can share the screen. Looks like I can. I'm getting pretty quick with this, I think.
Yeah, I can see it.
Good, good. So now can I control my slideshow? Oh yes, you see the refuge prayer. Okay, so we'll do one time in English, one time in Tibetan, and then one more time in English. And recite this. I don't think I have anything to add to Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, so keep that in mind as we recite. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of accomplishing generosity and the other perfections, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. O Sangye Chidang Sukhi Chodnamla Chanchu Padu Dakni Kyapsuchi Aki Jinsu Ki Pesunamki Drola Pinchi Sangye Drupasho. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of accomplishing generosity and the other perfections, may I attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And I'll say my own short prayer. Oh, Babin Sawelama Rinpoche. Agi Chiwa Bedide Jula Arin Shempo Goniche Sunte Kusun Tugina Jupsta So. Okay. I'd like to start because I think this is the last in this resilience and resourcing series, which has been I hope it's been helpful. This has been really helpful stuff for me, so I hope it has transferred to others as well. And in a lot of ways, it feels like the first time that I'm starting to get embodied kind of practice together, like really starting to, and I'll tell you one of the ways that has hit me lately is in my yoga practice, because I realize how much of my life I was really, I mean, people always say just do what you can or modify as you need to or whatever, and I really was always hung up on doing those postures perfectly, and just get, pushing myself to stretch further or go farther. Or, I mean, that I really was in a way attached to some sort of perfect goal, that may be there. It's good to have an ultimate perfect goal in mind, but in the moment, I was not really helping myself because I wasn't doing the practice I needed in that moment. I would hurt myself or push myself further than I could, or, pull muscles here and there, or, I was not in the moment being awake in a clear kind of awareness. And in the first talk in this series, I mentioned how sati is Pali, and that's the word that we generally translate as mindfulness. But it actually means several things, including presence of mind, memory, and clear awareness. So it's really like a direct experience of how things are in this moment. And if we think about karma and habits that we generate, and we think about how frequently we don't necessarily notice those habits happening. We know a lot of times in the rear view mirror when we've acted out of attachment and caused some kind of suffering. But a lot of times in the moment, we don't even see it happening. We don't even see the action occurring. Karma means action. So we may not even catch it until after it's over. And that's kind of a clear sign that in that moment, we were not mindful. We were not in a state of clear awareness. So karma, itself being habit, we can utilize it too. And so part of utilizing it, I think, is really connecting with how we're doing in the given moment. And we started the meditation earlier, and we can do it again right now too, just because I think it's a really good practice, with just a moment of checking in. And I really think this is like the seed of a moment to moment clear awareness, really paying attention to how we're doing in this moment. So let's try that just real briefly, because I can't tell you how powerful this simple practice can be in any given moment. But just take a second to see how you're feeling, and I'll give you a construct for that. We worked with this in previous sessions too, which is this model of dullness to agitation. We often describe dullness and agitation as the two obstacles to shamatha, or calm abiding meditation. So let's just pay attention in this moment and see if we think about the scale from maximum dullness to maximum agitation in our experience, so whatever we've experienced is the most dull or the most agitated. Let's just take a moment quietly to see if you can figure out where you're at on that scale. Okay. And wherever you are is okay. I think one of the reasons I think this is such a powerful habit to build is that it contains, all the things we say about what a moment of mindfulness is. We're in the present moment. We're not letting our mind be reactive. We're purposefully paying attention in the moment, and we're also like letting go of judgments. I mean, I know for me, a lot of times I start to feel a certain way because I feel a certain way. Like I feel a little upset because I'm feeling a little lonely or a little, bored, or whatever feeling I'm feeling. I then have a feeling about the feeling I'm feeling, and so I think just catching that habit, but that I'm sure I'm not the only one who has that experience. Like, I think that's another habit we can start to build some awareness of. And interestingly, when we notice that we are judging the way we feel, or having feeling about a feeling, in that moment of noticing that, like, we actually are being aware. In that moment, we're becoming aware of the actual situation. We have a presence of mind. We know what's going on right then. And it's funny because what we're feeling could be something rooted in attachment. It could be something arising because of suffering. Oftentimes I think it is, but at the same time, like, we got to spot it. Like, that's kind of the first step. Another thing we've talked about in this series of talks was how so often, instead of abandoning the attachment, which is the cause of the suffering, we try to abandon its cause, which is just a definition for distraction. I mean, that's just trying to give up the cause of, they're trying to give up suffering itself is never going to work, because suffering is caused by attachment. And if we are focused on giving up the suffering, that's not a good habit. So I think this process of just paying attention really helps. And I think one of the reasons it helps is because we start to see that we can be aware and notice things that aren't ideal. And I think that's really important to know, because our experience until we're enlightened is going to contain a lot of mistakes and a lot of imperfections. And we've got to be able to spot them, And so I think that really starts with just noticing how we're feeling. And that's why I think this is such a good model. But then I think it's also important to give ourselves a little bit of grace in terms of if we're outside a safe space, like this kind of window of tolerance. The idea here being that we can be agitated and still challenge ourselves. There are a lot of times we're not right in the middle of that spectrum. We're somewhere out to the sides. But there's a certain space, the majority of that we can still push ourselves and we can still challenge ourselves. But those outer edges, like, to me, that's where there's really only one thing, main thing, active thing that I can do, which is compassion. And in that moment, like, if you're way out in the dull zone or the agitated zone, like, the best practice at that moment is probably some kind of self-compassion practice, some kind of forgiving practice, some kind of acceptance for ourselves. And that may also mean, as we talked about, like, doing something to make yourself comfortable. Like, that may not be the time to try to do an hour-long, session of sitting. And in fact, sometimes, like, if we're using, like I mentioned earlier, like exteroception and interoception, and I've seen this a lot lately too, where maybe someone always uses an anchor that's internal, like they're always putting their attention on their breath. But if you have a lot of racing thoughts and your attention's always going on your breath internally, it actually kind of, that can become a little bit of an echo chamber. We may not have the strength and capability in a moment outside that window to actually have that be a helpful process in the moment, or a helpful meditation. So sorry, I just noticed there were a couple of messages. I want to make sure. Oh, sorry, Tara. How is it now?
No, sorry, it was
Oh,
about the refuge prayer. I didn't realize you were going to be doing a slideshow. I thought it was.
Oh, that's all right.
It was just for the refuge prayer. That's all.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Yeah, and I didn't realize it was on until I went to go do the next slide. So that I appreciate that. I just didn't notice the chat. So this to me is kind of a really central practice, because moment to moment, this can help us make decisions, and it can help us make smart decisions. And particularly when we're off the balance, off that, like, center point on either side here, like, that's when we're probably going to make choices that may not be the smartest, and kind of the further out we get, the more likely it might be that we're going to make choices that we regret, because we become less capable. Our resources are being challenged in those situations when we're at the extremes, and we're going to be less capable of spotting reactiveness, and we're going to be less capable of spotting habits of self-cherishing or aggression or things like that from coming up. We're just less equipped in those situations. So just knowing that is a helpful thing. And then we talked also about this window of tolerance, or this learning zone diagram. And this to me is just sort of like an extension of that, this idea that like we have this comfort zone in the middle. We love hanging out in the comfort zone. Outside of that, we have the learning zone, which is like a challenge zone, maybe. So this is where we're no longer necessarily comfortable, but we're able to grow. Like it's a zone where we've stepped out of the comfort and into something that can actually build strength and resilience. And that's good. But usually when we get to that zone, we feel like a lot of times like something's maybe not going right. And so like a lot of times our response to any departure from comfort becomes unhappiness. And in fact, we've actually moved into a zone where we're actually growing all of a sudden. Like if you know anything about like lifting weights or anything, it's those last few reps where you're actually building muscle, and that's because it's kind of the hardest part. You can go too far, but at the same time, a lot of the good things happen, a lot of the character growth, a lot of strength, lessons, these things happen in times of challenge. So we need to notice that like this is another habit to become unhappy when we're challenged, when in fact that challenge zone is the growth zone. It's where we grow. And of course, when we get to the overwhelm zone, we're unhappy. So I don't want to go through all of this again. I'll breeze through it quickly though, because I do think it's important. So one thing to note is the longer we're in that growth zone, the more it grows. So we want to hang out in that zone. Like that's how we make that learning zone bigger and the overwhelm zone smaller. Similarly, hanging out in that comfort zone too long. Oh, wait, this is the point I wanted to make. We also have to know when to go back to that comfort zone. We can't just stay in the learning zone forever. Sometimes we have to go back. And then we return when we've got some resilience, we're feeling strong, we can return to that learning zone. It'll grow a little bit. And the comfort zone grows too. And so eventually we end up with a pretty tiny overwhelm zone, and our comfort zone and our learning zone are bigger. And to me, this is a good state of our practice. When we're knowing when it's time to return to a little comfort and when it's time to challenge ourselves. And then the counterintuitive thing to remember is when we get in the middle, in that comfort zone, if we hang out there too long, it starts to shrink. So this is not just a one-way path necessarily. It's as we all have seen, it's a little up and down along the way. So a lot of times that happens because we don't realize that we're kind of hanging out in a safe zone. And in that way, we kind of take a few steps back and we get hung up on our comfort a little bit. And that zone will shrink the longer we stay in there. And then that gets a little upsetting because what was comfortable before is no longer comfortable. And we can think about that window of tolerance superimposed on here. So the idea is that your overwhelm zone might be agitated, it might be spaced out. That we need to notice that sometimes we have different reactions to being overwhelmed. And we also need to notice that, again, a lot of that window of tolerance includes a little bit of a challenge, and we can tolerate that. And so it's just a good construct to know. And we talked about thinking of some ways that you notice when you're entering your learning zone. So keeping stock of, maybe writing down, journaling, the things that you notice in sati, in your clear awareness, as being ways of indicators that you have entered that challenge zone. Because a lot of times we don't really realize when we get there, and instead we think we're in the overwhelm zone. So it's a good idea to notice, like, what's a sign I'm in a challenge zone, but I'm not overwhelmed. I can take this. This is going to help me grow. Similarly, building some awareness of when we get into the overwhelm zone. Working at a university, like a high achieving university or full of high achievers, I'm seeing this all the time now. Like, this is kind of how high achievers train, is to not notice when they get in that overwhelm zone. They kind of mute through their practice when they get overwhelmed, because they feel like that just noticing the overwhelm is like some kind of defect and will hold them back or something. But And there are situations you can't always get out of the overwhelm zone just because you want to. But again, if you know you're in it, you're probably going to make more informed choices. So another good thing to journal about here, what are some ways you know you're getting in the overwhelm zone? And then the third thing really was, what resources do you have to return to the comfort zone? This was one that I had to do a surprising amount of work on. Like I didn't have ready answers. I do now, but I think it's really good to know the ways that you can get yourself back in your comfort zone. And in a way, you probably already know some of these. Like it may be like watching a series or having an ice cream or, whatever thing it is that works. I think it's just good to have that at hand and be familiar with what it is. We also talked about mindful gauges. And so this is an extension of just understanding how you're feeling. We use the analogy here of like, how do you know when it's time to eat lunch? And the idea being that like you may have thoughts that it's time to eat lunch, or you may have physical sensations, emotions, or you think about pizza and so you want pizza. And so just becoming more aware of these things, that these processes that are running kind of in the background for us so much of the time. There's always things that tell us when to do stuff or encourage us to do stuff one way or another, or trigger a habit of doing something. But are we noticing those things? It's always happening. So can we pay enough attention to actually see the process and then start to affect it? And the process to do that was to pause, which is just to be present. And actually, if we use the example, I think when we did this before, we used an example of like considering whether to have a cold drink or a hot drink. And so if we pause for a moment and think about having a cold drink, and in this pause phase, we're just paying attention. And then we gather information, like what did we potentially think or feel, or what images came to our mind. And then with that info, we can assess what we should do. Like what's the information we're getting back when we kind of run a simulation of an option. And the key things to remember here are that our gauges are dynamic, so they're always changing. If you want to practice this, start with neutral choices. Be patient, because this takes time and practice. And experiment and stay curious. And I hope it's clear, and I want to have a little dialogue now too. I hope it's clear how this kind of stuff requires a practice of meditation, and requires us to do some practice at home with shamatha and tonglen and these kinds of things. How this is, in a way, how you take it into the world, because I think that to me is another place where the crux of my journey has taken me, is recognizing that, I think I've heard since day one, like we need to kind of blur that wall between being on the cushion and daily life, right? On the cushion practice and daily life. And I've kind of tried to switch my terminology lately to formal practice and applied practice, rather than on the cushion and off the cushion, or meditation and daily life. I mean, I like the idea of formal practice and daily practice because it's practice with a modifier. We're either doing a formal practice or it's applied is really, that's where it matters, right? Like, because that's most of our day. So can we make our daily life into the applied practice and recognize that our formal practice, while incredibly consequential, is formal. It's a little, I should have looked at the definition of formal, but it's a little stilted. It's not maybe what we do all the time. We know that because most of us aren't meditating all day. But that, so really it's like, how do we take what we're doing in our formal practice and plug it in to everything we're doing in our daily life? Because the more we can do practice, the better. But the more we think that we have to be in a formal setting to do it, the less able we are to practice it when we're not in that formal setting, which is kind of, you could apply this back to the learning zone kind of thing. You know, if our comfort zone for our practice is the formal practice, you know, is that really helping a whole lot? You know, it's definitely not helping as much as it could. And if we're really becoming attached to that formal setting, and then we leave that setting and we're challenged by the way the world actually is, because we're acclimating ourselves to the formal, stilted kind of practice, that's a big obstacle, you know? And so we have to be able to put practice as the continuum, you know, and then consider the scenarios in which it's happening and see how we can apply the practices, you know, in the applied manner. And a lot of times that seems like, I mean, it almost seems like it gets in the way of them. And so, for instance, if we think about like shamatha, you know, like the instruction is place your attention, notice when you're distracted, bring your attention back. You know, that's the simple instruction. But like, how do you do that while you're at work and like talking to people and answering emails and all those kind of things? Like, it's not like it can't be done, but it takes some adjusting. It's not going to be that pure, simple practice. It's going to be a sort of a macro version, right? Where sometimes you're distracted and you come back. Maybe your distraction is 4 emails and a phone call, and then you come back, you know, but still you're on this macro level, noticing the distraction and coming back. Similarly, it's layers of conceptuality. You know, it may be noticing, like we talked about, noticing the mindful gauges, or noticing the things that are making us make the choices we're making. Noticing, you know, yeah, so I do want to open this up to conversation. So maybe where we'll start is like, I guess I'm just wondering, like, how many times maybe people have not recognized that they did something because they felt a certain way. And it wasn't maybe until after you did or said something, you were like, oh, I've actually been pretty grumpy today. Or, oh, I've actually not been getting enough sleep. You know, like you maybe doing the thing helped you notice how you felt rather than noticing how you feel. Yes, Betty. Oh, Betty, you're muted.
Betty, you're muted.
We can't hear you if you're talking. I think you're muted.
Hi,
Hi.
Alan.
Yes.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I miss you.
Oh, thank you. I miss you too. Did you?
Yeah.
What did you want to share? I'd love to hear.
Well, I love to share the how my experience about the Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
Today we just I listened to the Heart of Sutra from the Dharma Martin. Yeah, but it speaks Chinese.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And I also practice the Tantra. That's the Yamataka. That's a Galup
Okay.
tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So I practice from Kansu Rinpoche Losang Chaipiao, that's Galup. I also have a Kansas City, the Remei Buddhist Center. There's a Lama Adam. He used to be my teacher.
Oh, okay. Neat. So
And,
do you
and I practice with Lama Patan Gongcha on Sundays. And when I went to his temple.
Good. Can you do you have any times you can share where you notice like
that
maybe an over
peace,
what's that?
Mind, and also that helped me calm myself down, something like that.
Oh, good. The practice did.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think a lot of times like listening is maybe a good alternative if we don't feel like we're in a position to do a practice. I think sometimes that's for me a good alternative is like if I'm feeling like just too much is going on, and part of this, by the way, comes from Kempo Carter Rinpoche's excellent at the beginning when he talks about when in the shamatha section, he talks about when in a session of meditation, all antidotes to dullness and torpor. And he also talks about when you are too agitated or too dull, how you need to stop meditating. And it's actually really interesting, not forever, but in that moment, you should get up and take a walk or something and then come back when that dullness, that extreme dullness or torpor goes away. But it's an interesting paragraph because he says, that you can't keep going if it's that extreme kind of dullness or torpor. But he also says when you decide how long you're going to meditate, you should sit down and meditate for that long. So I think it's really what I take from that is, we need to push into that learning zone, but we also need to be aware when we're just a little too far one direction or the other. But I really like Dharma talks or looking at pictures of deities or switching to just a mantra sometimes can help to calm down. Anyone else?
Yeah. And also,
go ahead.
practice 13 Yamatakas and also Mahakalas. That's
Good.
And also two more
That's
two more from the Dharma King. That's the from Lima tradition.
We dedicate all your merit. That's great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any thoughts on? I kind of threw at you everything we covered over 3 series. And I also want to make sure, I know last time we were talking about 3-year retreat too. So I want to make sure that's always open if people have thought of questions since then that they want to hit. Yeah, Lisa?
What's the average time a day that a practitioner meditates just on silent meditation? Is there like a average
like in retreat or just
like in general, like in everyday?
Yeah.
Is there like a minimum, maximum, or
yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. I know, what Rinpoche said was start around 5 minutes. I could say that there's research now that says 3 minutes helps even. So like there's actually noticeable benefits even with 3 minutes a day. But Rinpoche said we should try to get up to 20 minutes. To me, that's like a good minimum. But he also said really everybody ought to be doing about an hour a day. I mean, if we can,
Okay. And you can break it up like throughout the day, right? Or hours straight.
I think you should pay attention to how you're feeling and see what you can do. You know what I mean? I think if you can do it all at once, I think that's great. But I think it's really important not, because that's kind of this whole subject matter is don't push yourself too far. If it feels like, and it's also said too, that like, if you sit down to meditate and as you meditate, you get more agitated or more dull while you're meditating, then you probably need to do shorter sessions. But if you sit down and you actually become more balanced, like less agitated, then you can go for longer. So I think that's a good indicator, is just noticing, is it just getting worse and worse and worse the longer you're sitting,
Okay. Yeah.
But furthermore, I realized you asked like quiet sitting, and it could be, but for instance, in the retreat, there's no quiet sitting meditation. Like that's not, I mean, it's not like it's prohibited, but that's not what we're doing in 3-year retreat. And it's not like we're missing anything. So if you have practices, like, especially I'm talking specifically about like Chenrezig or Green Tara or sadhana, like those include a shamatha element. I mean, that visualization is a practice where you're placing attention. Same thing with the mantra. But I see that deity practice, that Vajrayana practice, as being like kind of like the culmination of shamatha and Tonglen. So some kind of practice that is placing attention, and then also one that works with love, and compassion. So that kind of comes together in the deity practices. So I wouldn't say like that you should, why did I bring that up? Well, I know like you want to definitely do, if you're doing some shamatha, then do some tonglen, you know.
Okay.
But if you want to just do a deity meditation, that's something you could totally try out. I mean, I think if you do, for instance, even just like a short Chenrezig, it could be an hour long. You could do chant the beginning, and then there's any number of things you can do for the visualization that we went in. I think I talked about that like 6 months ago. You know, it's like tons of options of visualization and mantra, and you know, so there's a lot of things you can do in the mantra session, and then just close the practice maybe 57 minutes later or something, and you didn't lose anything there. You know, you didn't miss anything there. But again, paying attention, if your visualization is very unsteady, that's probably because your shamatha isn't strong enough. And so that's an indicator you probably should do some more shamatha, you know.
Okay. Oh, good. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Try the what?
One more thing, the deity. One more thing. So if I go on a hike by myself in the mountains or whatever, can I use that as a practice? Like, can I do like a mantra or maybe tonglen?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I love it. Yes, totally. Yeah, totally. So wait, so what were your ideas?
Yeah,
like do a
like
mantra.
tonglen. Yeah, mantra. Should I do like Amani Pemi Home as I'm doing it? Like maybe it's an hour and a half. Okay.
Yeah. I think, you know, I want to qualify this. I think I can't say this as a purely blanket statement, but I think if we remember that the cause of suffering is attachment, and that all of this Dharma practice is here to help us let go of attachment, then we're pretty well equipped to adapt these practices in ways that we think will help with that. So it's not like we can't make mistakes. That's why I'm qualifying it. It's not like we can't make mistakes in applying these practices. But I think the question really is, number one, is the way I'm using this practice helping me to let go a little bit? You know, I think that's the most important question. But the second most important question, which again relates to all of this, is what's happening with the trend line of my kleshas? You know, what's happening with the trend line of my negative emotions? As I do this, how I'm doing it, are they getting worse or are they getting better? You know, and that applies to applied practice or formal practice. You know, there's a lot of times where we may be doing a formal practice that is making us resentful or angry or more agitated. And this it's good to ask a teacher about this in a one-on-one interview, but it's definitely taught that like if overall a practice is making you worse, you know, then that's probably not the right practice to be doing, or else we're not doing it right. You know, that's not what Dharma should do. So, but back to your original question, like I always try to think of it 3 ways. Like I try to think of it like a shamatha way, like a hinayana way. So like maybe your practice of walking in the woods is just an open awareness, just being, you know, like that can be a practice that's actually shamatha too, you know, like just open awareness. You could be using as an anchor your footsteps or smells. You know, you could just place attention on like the smell of the woods. I can smell it right now, right? Like, and you just kind of leave your attention there. And when you notice yourself thinking about something else, or maybe like reviewing the smell, even if it's a good review, you know, like that's when you just gently bring your attention back to the smell, you know, and that would be like a shamatha approach. A tonglen approach for me would be thinking, like now I'm thinking, because this is a conceptual practice, maybe doing like a practice of wishing that everyone could have this experience. Maybe you're breathing in everyone else's suffering who isn't in the woods with you and giving them all of the happiness that you get from being in the woods. You know, and you're doing it and you're visualizing it and you're having the experience. You know, it's not like we've left the present moment or where we are, but we're in the moment, you know, breathing in suffering and giving out our experience in that moment, giving it away. And then the Vajrayana version is really like in a nutshell, just like remembering you are Chenrezig, you know, and remembering that all the beauty that you're seeing is Chenrezig too. All that form is Chenrezig, you know, all the sounds are actually mantra, you know, and anything that's popping into your mind as you walk in its essence, you know, is is enlightened mind. Maybe not the content, but so in that way you have three kind of options. There's a lot more than that, but that's three ways of practicing as they relate to the vehicles.
That's good. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
like it.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to practice for sure.
Do
Pair
it.
that with traffic.
Oh, yeah, right. Oh, good one.
Because again, woods could become a comfort zone for your practice,
Yeah.
you know, so definitely pair that with some traffic.
When I'm
What do they
driving
call it? Is
home
it the
from
405? What do you have out there? Everybody always makes
it.
jokes
Yeah.
about California
I'm
freeways.
hardly ever on the freeways. I very rarely drive. I can't stand it. 405, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tara?
So we actually had a discussion on this in my Nundro group this morning. And I asked other people what they were doing because, I was just curious. And because I started off meditating before I started Nundro. And so I have a habit of meditating for an hour every morning when I get up. And then I like to do my Nundro practice in the evenings. And then someone else said, oh, well, they had an interview with one of the Karagar instructors from Mingyur Rinpoche's group. And he said, oh, well, you don't need to do any sitting practice if you're doing Nundro. So I thought that was a little strange because Mingyur Rinpoche himself suggested that, 1 hour a day was a good goal to work for. And then, I was reading elsewhere that, however much you're doing, you should keep trying to increase it. So I'm thinking, okay, I've been doing an hour every day for several years now. Should I try and increase it? Even though I'm also doing Nundro, but I don't have anything else to do. So it's not as if I don't have a full-time job. So, I got plenty of time, but what do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple moving parts there. So like the first one is when you say in the morning you do an hour, you're talking about shamatha?
Well, it's I kind of have my own little structure for what I do, and
Yeah, of course.
there's
Yeah.
usually some Tonglen, there's usually, the contemplation of the four thoughts, refuge, bodhicitta, the 9 breaths, all that kind of stuff I have a little bit of a structure there. But a lot of times I just go with whatever I feel like I need that day. Like, if one day I get stuck on one of the 4 thoughts where it's really relevant, it's really grabbing me, and I can spend half an hour just on the one contemplation, and I just kind of go with whatever feels like what I need that day. But that's just my sitting practice, which can be, I guess you could call it a combination of shamatha and vipassana.
Yeah, and you've got I heard what I was hoping to hear, which is like you're doing a little non-conceptual and a little conceptual.
Yeah,
and then your
nature
Nundro
of
is
mind
kind of the
practice,
Vajrayana meeting.
Yeah, nature of mind practice, Tonglen, refuge, bodhicitta.
Yeah.
That. So
And I love that
try
you're
and
being
hit, I
responsive.
try and hit all the points.
Yeah, and I love that you're being responsive to your needs. I think that's really important, like day to day. But I'll tell you this, like I'll tell you a personal story, just to add some info. Like I think it's really your call. I don't think my humble opinion is I don't think there's a right answer to that question, and I think it's totally fine if you want to do an hour in the morning and Nundro at night. I think the argument against that might be, or the arguments against it might be that you only have so much time around here, in this life to potentially finish the Nundro. So there is the argument to be made that like it's something we shouldn't waste time on. If we have the opportunity to practice it, we should probably try to get through it as quickly as we're capable of. So I think the question with that particular argument might be like, do we need those other practices too, or is Nundro alone meeting our needs for progress on the path? And so the personal story here is like when I first got trained in Nundro, I showed up with Kathy Lamo. Some of you may know her from Columbus, and went to her house and she gave me instruction. And then at the end of the instruction, I was like, well, okay, so, usually I start with a Tashi prayer and I do this and I do that. And, how am I going to do this in the Nundro? And she was like, no, you just do Nundro now. Like that's your practice now. And like, I didn't know walking in the door that I was bidding farewell to these practices I had been with for so long and loved so much, you know, but I had to that was the instruction I got. And I was like, all right, I guess I'm working with this, you know? And so I had to let go of those practices. And honestly, that was really one of the more meaningful things I've gone through, is letting go of a Dharma practice because there's another one that it's time for me to do.
Okay, so
And
I didn't receive that instruction, although I was warned not to take too many empowerments, don't spread yourself too thin, don't try to do too much, you know, but like I said, I don't work. So I have a lot of time, and I have good energy, and it's not in any way taxing for me to do the meditation and to do the Nundro practice. Now, I mean, physically I can only do so many prostrations a day, okay? So that part
that's
is
true too.
self-limiting, you know, and I'm making really good, and I'm going through section by section, obviously, you know, prostrations, Vajrasattva, Mandala, and I'm concentrating mostly on Vajrasattva right now. And I feel comfortable that I can finish by this summer and move on to the Mandala practice.
Awesome.
So, I mean, I don't feel like I'm overwhelming myself. I mean, I know what you're talking about, overwhelm. Yeah, I know what overwhelm feels like, and I know how to step back from that and not do too much. But there's other practices that I very much enjoy, but I'm doing very, very concise versions of those practices so they don't eat up too much of my time. You know, I have a nice concise Chenrezig and Vajrakalaya and Termanagmo, and I do those practices, the really short ones, you know, daily. I mean, it takes 15 minutes. And then there's other, like the Termanagmo, which takes more like an hour and a half or 2 hours. I do that once a week. So I don't have to completely give it up.
Yeah.
So
well, like
that's
you said, it's
kind of how I'm
self-limiting.
finding balance.
Yeah. I think that's totally fine. And I think I think my only encouragement would be, if it's something you aren't already doing, like, see if you can spot the elements in Nundro that are that have things in common with what you're doing in the morning. You know, like, see if you can spot
another
the shamatha
teacher said
aspects.
that the dissolution part of each practice, that's a shamatha opportunity. And so when you dissolve the refuge tree and you dissolve Vajrasattva and all that, that's, you can sit for several minutes in shamatha at that point. And that's the only recommendation that I got about that. But I mean, I don't know. I don't feel like it's taking away from my Nundro, but
yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I think you're thinking about it in a way that makes a lot of sense. That's how I see it.
I just was shocked when they said that you should not do any sitting practice if you're doing Nundro. I thought that was very surprising. But I don't know. In general, I don't know a whole lot. So,
well, I appreciate you saying that too, because there's probably a whole discussion we can have about that too, because you know, I also have a problem with I mean, I shouldn't say I have a problem with, but I think that we always need a little more context when anybody says never or always, right? Because because we also have impermanence, right? So like, it's when we say always, I think there's maybe something beyond that we're saying. You know, it may not be saying like, you know, you always, you know, no, I don't know how to say it, but you know what I mean? Like, regardless of what happens, always do this, you know. I don't think that's actually what's being said. I think what's being said is, keep yourself in the challenge zone to do this as much as you can.
This is exactly it.
Never.
I'm trying to keep myself in the challenge zone without going into the overwhelm zone. And honestly, if I was 30 years old and I had small children and a full-time job, this would not be possible. It would be a major accomplishment just to do the Nundro, but that's not my situation. And so I feel like, because I'm 57 years old and I don't know how much longer I have, I want to do as much as I can, and I don't feel overwhelmed. So,
you know, I think that's great. Yeah. I think that's
okay. I'll just keep going then.
Yeah. Thanks. Rock on. Thank you. Anyone else? Any thoughts or questions or follow-ups from last time?
Oh, and I'm still waiting for installment 2 about more stories from your 3-year retreat. That was the most fascinating thing ever.
Oh, well, what were you thinking about? Were there more threads you wanted me to pull on?
Oh, no, I would like to hear anything that you're willing to talk about, because I thought the whole thing was just fascinating to me. I could listen to you talk for hours about that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, actually, there's 2 episodes of the podcast. I don't try to plug too often, but I have a podcast called Lama to Boot with Lama Mitchell Singletary from Mississippi. And there are 2 episodes that are called 3-Year Retreat, 3-Year Retreat, part 1 and part 2. And they're just us talking about the 3-year retreat. So,
Okay,
if
so
you,
what is the name of this blog?
I think I'm trying to find if I can message the group. There it is.
Yeah, you can
meeting
put it
group
in the chat.
There it is. So this is the pod, and yeah, there's 2 fun episodes where we just talk about the 3-year retreat. So you can find them online or on any wherever you find your podcast.
Great, I'll go check that out. Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah, but I was telling somebody else a story about retreat today, and it was because it had to do with breathing exercises. Like there's not much I'm going to say about some of the practices we do in retreat, because those are some of the most secret practices. But yogic practices are something that come up a lot in our kinds of communities, right? Like, because breath is a part of what we're doing, and if you're involved with yoga, breath is kind of central, and there are many practices about the breath that affect the mind and the body. And so I had somebody who found out about a practice that's one of the practices we do in retreat that involves breath, and they had read something. It was actually in a book called Breath that I think was relatively popular maybe 2 years ago. I think I have it in this house somewhere. I want to find it and see if I can read it. But I guess there's a chapter about this, or so the person said. And when I say, the reason I say so the person said is because I think I've seen so many versions of what this practice is, like just so many varieties of what it is and how to do it and what you do while you're doing, just so many different things. I mean, since retreat, before retreat, I didn't look into it at all. After retreat, I've kind of bumped into all these different lineages of it and descriptions. And, but so this person kind of asked me about that. And this again, like directly relates to what we're talking about, because number one, the few people I know who've had experiences of like extreme psychosis because of their meditation practice are people who were doing these breath work things, like these higher breath work practices. And I think that's actually, I don't think I'm the only person who's had that experience, so that's not to say there's anything wrong with them or bad about them, but I'm just like what I said to this person is, it's like, it's a hot stove and we're children that need some close supervision near the stove,
The only breathing experience I had that was kind of disturbing was Kundalini, and it was Kapalabhati practice, which was the first time I did it, I think I did it wrong, and it was very disturbing. So I can certainly see where that might be an issue.
Yeah, and that is the most common meditation related adverse effect is fear and terror, and yeah. So he'd asked me a little bit. He wasn't asking me to teach it to him, but it reminded me. My answer to him reminded me of something we talked about in retreat, which is I remember doing these practices in retreat and thinking at that time that I finally understood why practices are secret, or why we call them secret. And what I realized in that moment is, like, they're secret because, and I actually talked to Lama Mitchell about this in retreat, and we joked about how we could write a letter home with step-by-step instructions on how to do the 6 yogas of Naropa to our parents, and they would have no idea what we were talking about. I mean, they would understand the words.
It's a self
because they hadn't been
practice.
through. Well, and they hadn't been through all the preliminaries, all the instruction that went with the preliminaries.
I think that's what they mean by a self-secret practice. It means if you haven't had the instructions, you can read the words, but it won't mean
absolutely
anything to you.
Definitely. Yeah. That's it. I mean, and so it's funny because I don't think I could even we couldn't have a conversation about the same thing on that topic, because even if I did talk about the instructions of what we learned, which I wouldn't do, like, again, we would not be talking about the same thing. There's just no way. So, but all of that to say, like, I think that was because it does kind of back to retreat, because that's kind of the thing, is you're in this situation of intensive practice. We were lucky enough to be, have one teacher, really. I mean, we had the Karmapa came and Taisitu, and we watched, occasionally there would be a video teaching from another teacher, but it was really Rinpoche from beginning to end, giving the commentaries on all of these practices. And so it was his repetition, his metaphors, his, take on these things. And I think that is really unique and precious way to get to those practices, was like just a one track kind of thing. There was no chance of things getting confused or mixed up or anything. And the big picture thing here, and maybe to tie it back to the theme, is like, we have access to a lot of stuff now, and I was thinking the other day how, I mean, like, maybe I'm wrong here, but like, I feel like until like 80 years ago, like, you probably didn't do any meditation or learn to meditate. I mean, you're probably very lucky just to get an instruction on sitting, so like, and if you were going to get an instruction, you usually had to travel really far. And I mean, I think the amount of, I was thinking the other day that it's not unlike the cultural lag that's happening right now with us and the internet. Like, it's just too new. I mean, I don't know how true this is, but I remember somebody saying it took like 200 years until society adapted to the printing press or something, and I don't know what the grounds is for that, but I could see that being the case, because I can see right now that we don't know what the heck to do with this thing, like, and it's caused a lot of problems. It's really good in some ways too, but we don't know how to manage it. And like, it's going to be past our lifetimes, I think, when they get that figured out, if they do. But I think we're at a similar place with meditation. I mean, I don't think we, having grown up with it, I think we don't necessarily recognize often enough that, like, this is a whole new model now, with like being able to grab practices off the internet. I mean, even just think about how our own experiences, and this is another good thing we can talk about, but like, almost everything we shop for, or if we're going to buy something or join a club or something, we're going to go on the internet, we're going to research it, we're going to be clear about what we want, like what are our goals, like when we purchase this thing, and we're going to go and read the reviews, and we're going to see the product that matches what we want, and then we're going to purchase that one. But I don't know about you all, but I went to the temple that was in my city, like, it was the Buddhist temple here. And luckily it ended up being a good home. But, I think in general, a lot of times people just find the first app in the app store, or the first YouTube guided video, or just go to the one temple that's in their town. And, you might get lucky, but again, it's like, having it, just to jump back to the beginning about awareness, it's like, we should start with who we are, and what we're actually looking for. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, like, are the things we're doing meeting what we need in this moment, and that's exactly related to what Tara and I were talking about with practice too, like how on this day, what will help me to establish a little balance and go a little further on the path without forcing myself into the overwhelm zone, or to do things I regret, or yeah. And related to that, actually, there was one other slide I wanted to show here, which is, we're over time. Sorry, I'll show you this one real quick, and then share. So this is it's a matrix here, and this is just one last way to kind of think about this stuff. The idea is that in life we meet challenges. This is an adaptation of a model. I forget what it's called, something like the stress model. But like, in life we meet challenges, we have vulnerabilities, and we have resources. And each of those three things happens in three realms: external, in the body, or in the mind. So I think with a lot of Dharma, we're working in the rightmost bottom two squares, right? Like, really we're building resources, but those resources also help us with some vulnerabilities, help shore up some vulnerabilities. But for the most part, we're working in that bottom right square. I think we're working with the resources in the mind, because those things can help all the other squares. But at the same time, like, we need to kind of consider when something comes at us, some kind of challenge, what kind of challenge is this, external, in the body, in my mind, like, and get a little clear. Maybe it's a mix of those things, and then notice what vulnerability is making that challenging for us. What shortcoming or what thing that we lack, or, is what opening that we could close is letting in that challenge. And then noticing the resources we have externally in the body and in the mind, and then matching that to the challenge. And I think that works with practices. I think that works with, well, I mean, obviously, like I said, it's kind of all practice, but I think that this has helped me to have this kind of awareness and get a little clear on what's going on, especially because a lot of times what seems like an external challenge is really an internal challenge. I think that's can be a really helpful thing to recognize in the moment. So again, just multiple ways of kind of trying to connect with a real awareness of how we are and what's going on. Yeah.
Great.
And all of this to say, and then we'll dedicate the merit, like, all of this to say that, we have to have this aspiration for Buddhahood, but until we get there, we're going to experience all these ups and downs. And like, that compassion is so important. That's how we're going to get to the end, is compassion. And that compassion starts with us, and it starts with our shamatha. It starts with getting distracted and not getting mad, just coming back. So really, yeah, I hope that all of this stuff has been a little helpful, and I would just encourage everybody to play with your practice, play with it off the cushion, in particular, in the applied practice, see how many ways you can plug it in. And so we'll dedicate the merit.
Yeah, Lama Adam, please, we'll do a dedication of merit, and then when you depart, some of us will stay on after. So,
okay.
Yeah, please lead us.
All right. Okay, I'll put it on the screen. Oh, are you seeing my whole screen?
Yeah.
Looks like. All right. By this merit, may all beings obtain the omniscience of Buddhahood and defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, may we free all beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who also knows in the same way, and also the Bodhisattvas, they may follow in their path. I completely dedicate all this virtue. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Lama Adam.
See you again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.